The feared Mafia boss goes soft for the shy black waitress, until jealousy pushes him over the edge. Snow falls hard as Grondin Bergman stands outside the Pearson house, his breath sharp in the night air, his suit already dusted in white. His fists are tight at his sides, tattoos showing as he stares through the wide glass window. Roxanna Horton moves between tables with her usual calm steps, her curls tucked neatly into her work bun. But Grondin isn't watching her work. He's watching the way she smiles at Devon, the co-worker wiping down menus while talking close to her. Roxanna's shy laugh lifts just enough for Grondin to hear through the door. It hits him like a punch to the chest. This man who controls half of Chicago's underground feels something he's never allowed himself to feel. Fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of being replaced. His hands shake, not from the cold, but from the pressure building in his chest. He knows Roxanna trusts him more than anyone ever has. She believes he can be better, kinder, safe. But as he watches Devon lean closer to her, a painful heat rises through him. He takes one step toward the entrance, unsure if he's about to prove her right or destroy everything she's helped him become. My dad always believed I could reach 10,000 subscribers, even when he was sick. If you'd like to support my journey, please hit the subscribe button. It would mean the world to me. Grondin Bergman ruled Chicago's underground with a calm that frightened most men. From the Gold Coast to Oak Park, people moved when he spoke, stepped aside when he walked, and lowered their eyes when he entered a room. His power didn't come from loud threats or sudden outbursts. It came from certainty, certainty that he would act, certainty that he would win, certainty that no one dared test him twice. Most of his days began in his high-rise office overlooking the Chicago River, a place built with dark steel, thick windows, and clean lines. From that height, the city looked controlled and manageable, even peaceful. Inside, however, the atmosphere was heavy with strategy. Associates filed in for meetings at exact times, presenting updates on money routes, security gaps, and the behavior of competing groups. Every detail mattered. Every misstep carried consequences. People spoke to him with steady voices but stiff shoulders. Loyalty was expected, demanded, and maintained by a long history of consequences for anyone who tried to betray him. Grondin didn't need to raise his voice to assert dominance. A simple look was enough to remind them of everything he had survived and everything he was willing to do. It was rare for anyone to challenge him, and rarer still for anyone to truly know him. Despite the attention his position brought, he lived in a world where trust was almost non-existent. Every person around him had a purpose: security, transport, negotiation, or management, not true companionship. His closest circle wasn't close at all. They respected him, feared him, and relied on him, but none of them understood him. None dared ask what weighed on him. None dared speak about how tired he sometimes looked. They only saw the boss. The man behind that role stayed invisible. At night, he returned to his penthouse on Lake Shore Drive, a space filled with expensive art, stone floors, custom lighting, and furniture chosen for its cost rather than comfort. Many people would have called it impressive. To Grondin, it felt like a silent container, large but empty. He walked through rooms that never heard laughter or conversation. The kitchen held ingredients he didn't cook. The master bedroom overlooked the dark lake, but he rarely enjoyed the view. Most nights he sat on the edge of his bed, arms resting on his knees, staring at the city lights while wondering what any of it meant. Power had filled his schedule, but not his life. His title pulled people toward him, but only because of what they could gain or avoid. No one touched his heart. No one eased the weight of his past. No one asked what he wanted outside the world he controlled. He knew how people described him: broad shoulders, strong jaw, a body sculpted by years of fighting and training. His tattoos carried the stories he never told out loud: warnings, victories, losses, and memories of the people he had buried, both enemies and those he once cared for. They were etched across his arms, chest, and back like reminders of the life he couldn't escape. Each one marked an event that had shaped him. His suits were tailored, dark, and sharp, intended to present structure and strength. They were his armor in a world where softness could get a man killed. Yet under those suits, under the discipline and authority, he carried wounds he never addressed. His eyes revealed more than he admitted. They were alight, guarded, and tired, eyes of someone who had seen too much too young and learned too early that survival required emotional distance. Even in moments of quiet, he couldn't fully relax. His phone stayed within reach, his mind constantly alight for shifts in alliances, movements of rivals, or threats to his operations. He had made the mistake of letting his guard down once in his early 20s, trusting a man who later betrayed him. That betrayal had cost lives and left deep marks on his psyche. Since then, he never allowed anyone close enough to hurt him again. Yet, behind all the strength and control, loneliness crept in. Some nights, when Chicago settled into its late hum, he stood at the tall windows of his penthouse and stared out at the lake. He wondered if this was all there was: power, strategy, wealth, and endless caution. He wondered if he was meant to live like this forever, surrounded by people who respected him but didn't truly know him. He had built an empire, but he had lost something human along the way. Companionship felt distant, affection felt foreign, and the idea of genuine connection seemed unrealistic. He didn't even know what softness felt like anymore. There were moments when his chest tightened with a longing he couldn't name, moments when he questioned whether he was meant to be alone. But he always pushed those thoughts down. Power demanded distance. Leadership demanded caution. Safety demanded a hardened heart. That was his world: cold, controlled, and isolated. Until Roxanna. But that shift would come later. Long before she stepped into his life, Grondin existed in a state of quiet suffocation, powerful but untouched by anything resembling warmth. His days moved in strict lines. His nights stretched into silence. His life, for all its structure, lacked meaning. And he didn't even realize how empty it truly was. Not yet. Roxanna Horton grew up in Bronzeville, in a small apartment just off King Drive. It wasn't the kind of place that turned heads, but it held the pieces of her childhood: painted walls her mother decorated before passing, shelves filled with second-hand books her father collected, and the warm voice of the grandmother who raised her. She lost both parents young, too young to remember the sound of their laughter, but old enough to feel the empty spaces they left behind. Her grandmother, Miss Claudine, stepped in without hesitation, carrying the weight of responsibility with love instead of complaint. The apartment was small, but it was alive with care. Music from old records played on quiet mornings, and the smell of cornbread filled the hallway on Sundays. Miss Claudine believed in dreams, even when life made them hard to reach. She encouraged Roxanna to keep writing in her worn notebooks, filling page after page with stories. Roxanna wrote about hope, about courage, about worlds that looked nothing like her own but reflected what she wished could be true. She dreamed of becoming a writer, not for fame, but because she wanted her words to touch people the way books had touched her. That dream carried her all the way to Columbia College, Chicago. She walked onto that campus with a backpack full of books, thrift clothes, and a quiet determination. She stood out in her own subtle way, soft-spoken, observant, and filled with a steady drive. She never needed loudness to make her presence known. She listened deeply, spoke thoughtfully, and connected with people through honesty rather than performance. But during her second year, everything changed. Miss Claudine suffered a stroke that left her weak and unable to work. Medical bills piled up faster than Roxanna could handle. The decision to leave school was painful, but it wasn't a question in her mind. Her grandmother had given up everything to raise her. Now it was her turn to give back. She found work at the Pearson House, one of the polished restaurants in River North where the city's wealthy came to dine. From the outside, the place looked like luxury, sleek design, well-dressed hosts, and tables filled with people who spoke as though the world belonged to them. From the inside, it was fast, demanding, and sometimes overwhelming. Roxanna learned quickly that in a place like that, the staff existed to serve, not to be noticed. Still, she handled every shift with grace. She moved quietly, carried trays with practiced steadiness, and offered a kind smile to guests who rarely looked beyond their menus. Some customers treated her kindly, others barely acknowledged her, but she remained composed no matter the tone they used. She didn't allow disrespect to shake her spirit. She had learned long ago that dignity came from within, not from the approval of others. Her shy nature often led people to underestimate her, but shyness didn't make her weak. She stood up for herself when it mattered. She defended co-workers when they were treated unfairly. She knew how to hold her own without raising her voice. Her strength was steady, gentle, and unforced, something most people didn't immediately notice but felt the longer they were around her. Roxanna kept her natural hair in styles that suited her shifts, tight coils gathered neatly into buns or puffs that framed her face. She didn't try to stand out, yet she carried a beauty that drew attention without effort. Her features were soft, her brown skin warm under the restaurant lights, and her eyes held a quiet depth that revealed more emotion than her words ever did. She didn't dress to impress. She dressed to stay comfortable and professional. Simple earrings, minimal makeup, a clean uniform, nothing flashy, nothing loud. Outside of work, life was a balance of caregiving and writing. She spent evenings helping her grandmother with medication, preparing meals, and keeping the apartment in order. Once Miss Claudine was asleep, Roxanna would sit at the small kitchen table with her notebook and write until her hand grew tired. She poured her hopes, fears, and dreams into those pages, creating stories that gave her a sense of direction when life felt uncertain. Even though her world carried heavy responsibilities, she didn't complain. She believed there was beauty in small victories, being able to pay the bills on time, seeing her grandmother smile on good days, or finishing a new chapter in her notebook. She held on to that quiet strength like a lifeline. Her co-workers respected her. Some admired her calm presence. Others confided in her because she listened without judgment. She didn't gossip, didn't seek attention, and didn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. She simply showed up, worked hard, and treated people with kindness. That alone made her stand out more than she realized. Roxanna lived a humble life, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with resilience, love, and a quiet determination to keep going, even when the world seemed too heavy. She didn't know her path would soon cross with someone who lived in a reality opposite hers, someone feared, wealthy, and powerful. Someone who would see not just a waitress, but the woman beneath the surface. She had no idea her next shift at the Pearson House would change everything. It was a cold Thursday evening in October when Grondin Bergman stepped through the doors of the Pearson House for a private meeting. The restaurant was busy. Soft chatter, quiet clinks of silverware, and the steady rhythm of servers weaving between tables. He walked in with two associates, both alert, both tense. The host recognized him immediately and stiffened before leading them to the back corner table reserved for high-profile clients. Roxanna had just returned from dropping off dessert menus when the manager called her aside. Table 32. VIP. Handle it professionally, he murmured, giving her a look that meant be careful. She nodded and grabbed her notepad, steadying her breath. She didn't know who was sitting there, only that the staff treated certain guests with extra care. She approached the corner table with her usual calm steps, unaware that this was the moment her life would shift. Grondin looked up at the sound of her voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a simple, warm, good evening. My name is Roxanna. I'll be taking care of you tonight. For a second, he forgot to respond. Most servers met him with stiff smiles or trembling hands. Some avoided eye contact. Others overcompensated with nervous chatter. Roxanna did none of that. She stood there steady, polite, and real. Her uniform was simple: black shirt, fitted apron, hair pinned up neatly, but something about her presence hit him harder than any threat he'd ever faced. Her eyes met his without challenge, without fear, without judgment. She saw him, not his reputation. He wasn't used to that. "Water to start?" she asked gently. He cleared his throat and nodded. "Yes." The words sounded rougher than he intended. She didn't flinch. She wrote it down with smooth movements and continued around the table, treating his associates with the same calm she offered him. When she walked away, Grondin found himself following her with his eyes, confused by the sudden tightening in his chest. She moved gracefully, focused, unaware of how unusual that simple confidence felt to him. His meeting began. Reports, numbers, updates, but his attention kept drifting back to the quiet woman who carried herself with dignity in a room full of demanding customers. He told himself it was nothing, just distraction. Yet something in him stayed alight whenever she approached. When Roxanna returned with the water, she placed the glasses down with easy precision. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few minutes?" Before his associate could speak for him, Grondin answered, "A few minutes." Roxanna nodded. "Take all the time you need." Again, no fuss, no forced smile, no attempt to impress. She treated him like a human being rather than a threat or title. The simplicity of it shook him in ways he couldn't explain. As she walked away, his associate leaned toward him. "Boss, everything okay?" Grondin ignored the question. Everything was not okay. Something was off, and he didn't know how to process it. When she returned to take their order, she stood close enough for him to catch the faint scent of vanilla from her skin. Her voice remained steady as she listed the specials. He watched her face carefully, noticing small details, the gentle curve of her smile, the seriousness in her eyes when she focused on accuracy, the unspoken kindness she carried like second nature. When she turned to him, he felt a strange pull. No woman had ever made him feel unsettled simply by existing. "What would you like tonight?" she asked softly. He looked at the menu but didn't read it. "The usual," he started, then stopped. He didn't have a usual here. He barely came to places like this. Roxanna noticed the hesitation but didn't comment. "If you want something warm, the short ribs are a favorite. If you prefer something lighter, the grilled salmon is well seasoned." She didn't push. She simply offered options. He picked one just to end the strange tension. "Short ribs." She wrote it down with a small nod and collected the menus. As she stepped away, he watched the gentle sway of her walk, the quiet confidence in her posture, the way she blended into the flow of the restaurant while still standing out without trying. His associate spoke again. "Boss, you sure everything is fine?" He was sure of nothing. This woman had walked up to him with a simple greeting, and something inside him had shifted. During the meal, he found himself listening for her footsteps. Each time she returned, she gave short, polite updates. Is everything okay? Can I get you anything else? Not overly friendly, not cold. Just sincere. Sincere. That was the word. He didn't remember the last time anyone had been that with him. When the meeting ended and Roxanna returned with the bill, their eyes met again. She offered a gentle smile, nothing lingering, nothing flirtatious, just genuine warmth. Thank you for coming in tonight, she said. It shouldn't have meant anything. It was a normal closing line. But from her, it landed differently. He left the restaurant with his thoughts in chaos. The city air felt heavier, his steps slower. Something had cracked in him with no warning. A quiet waitress in a simple uniform had reached a part of him he didn't know was still alive. And he couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was only the beginning. After that October night, Grondin returned to the Pearson house far more often than anyone expected. At first, he told himself it was for business meetings, a neutral location, a comfortable space to discuss plans. But he knew the truth. Each visit pulled him toward one reason, Roxanna. He never announced his presence. He simply walked in, waited for the host to recognize him, and, without fail, requested her section. The first time he asked, she looked surprised, almost unsure if he meant it. But the manager didn't question the request. A customer like Grondin brought money and attention, both things the restaurant valued. Their early interactions remained formal, shaped by professional boundaries. Roxanna greeted him with the same calm tone she offered every guest. He ordered quietly, rarely smiling, always composed. Yet beneath those simple exchanges, something subtle grew. A comfort, a pull neither of them fully understood. One evening, as she approached with his order, she noticed the book resting near his hand. It wasn't his, it was hers. She had left her bag under the counter during break, and the top of the book must have been visible when she passed earlier. "Toni Morrison?" he asked, tapping the cover gently. Her eyes widened. "You know her work?" He nodded. "I've read a few pieces. Someone once told me her writing shows emotion without being loud. I didn't understand what they meant until I read her." She felt warmth spread through her chest. It was rare for customers to take interest in the books she carried. Rarer still for someone like him, sharp suit, guarded eyes, to speak about literature. "She was one of my favorites in school," Roxanna said softly. "Her stories feel honest, even when they hurt." He studied her for a moment longer than usual, his expression unreadable. "You like stories that tell the truth." "Most people do," she replied. "Not in my world." The words came out quiet, almost unguarded, and for a brief second she saw the man behind the armor, tired, lonely, carrying more weight than anyone should. She didn't push. She simply nodded and placed his plate down. Small moments like that continued to happen. Conversations slipped from menu recommendations to casual observations about Chicago's autumn, how the wind felt sharper this year, how the trees near the river turned deep shades of gold. Grondin began arriving before the dinner rush just to catch a few peaceful minutes in her section. She was busy, often moving quickly, but he didn't mind waiting. One afternoon, as she handed him his coffee, she teased lightly, "You always order the same thing." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that a problem?" "Not at all. Just predictable," she said with a soft smile. For the first time she had ever seen, he laughed. Not a wide laugh, not loud, but real, low and warm, surprising even him. The staff noticed, though they pretended not to stare. It was strange to see the man known for strict control letting down his guard, even slightly. Whispers began among her co-workers. "He always asks for her. He tips her more than anyone else." Do you think his? No. Have you seen how she acts? She's professional. They didn't gossip out of malice, they worried for her. They knew enough about the type of man he was, rumors about money, influence, and danger circulated often. But every time she served him, nothing improper happened. No touching, no suggestive comments, no gifts. Just conversation. Just a man and a woman learning each other slowly. Still, Roxanna felt the quiet shift inside herself. She tried to fight it. Attraction towards someone in his world made no sense. She had lived her whole life avoiding trouble, staying grounded, working hard to protect her grandmother. Falling for a man with power, enemies, and shadows around him could break everything she struggled to build. Yet each time he looked at her with those controlled, searching eyes, she sensed someone deeper, someone hurting, someone longing, someone trying to understand how to be human again. She couldn't deny the gentle spark that grew each time he returned to her section. Grondin faced his own struggle. Vulnerability felt dangerous. He had spent years keeping people at a distance because closeness invited betrayal. But Roxanna's presence softened him in ways he didn't welcome. He found himself thinking about her voice, her calmness, the careful way she treated everyone she served. He wondered what she did after work, what she dreamed of, what she feared. He tried to stay detached. He failed every time. When she handed him his check one evening, their fingers brushed lightly. The contact was brief, barely a second, but the shift it caused in both of them was unmistakable. Her breath caught. His heart thudded faster than he wanted to admit. They both stepped back, each pretending the moment was accidental. As he prepared to leave, she wished him a good night with the same tone she always used. But the emotion behind it felt different, gentler, warmer. He paused before stepping away. "Good night, Roxanna." The way he said her name, low, sincere, lingered with her long after he left. Two people from opposite worlds, moving slowly, carefully, towards something neither expected. Something they both feared, but neither of them wanted to stop. The snow had been falling since late afternoon, softening the noise of the city until Chicago felt like a world wrapped in winter's hush. Roxanna had finished her shift early, slipped into her jeans, boots, and the deep green coat she saved for the coldest nights. Her hair, usually pinned and tucked away, hung loose around her shoulders, catching snowflakes as she stepped out of the employee exit and walked toward the front of the restaurant to grab a ride-share. She didn't expect anyone to recognize her. She certainly didn't expect him. Grondin had arrived minutes earlier, brushing flakes from his coat collar, preparing to walk inside for his usual coffee and a few quiet minutes after a long day. But when he pulled open the glass door, Roxanna was on the other side, head down, adjusting her gloves, moving too quickly to notice. They collided, not hard, just enough for her breath to catch and for his hand to instinctively steady her elbow. For a moment, neither spoke. He stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. No apron, no uniform. Just Roxanna, warm skin, soft curls, the gentleness in her eyes untouched by the restaurant lights. She had always been pretty, but this was different. This was her without walls. She whispered his name before she could stop herself. "Grondin." His answer wasn't smooth or planned. It sounded like something pulled straight from the center of him. "Have dinner with me." A quiet request, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed. Not a command, not a tone meant to intimidate, just a man who suddenly didn't want the night to end without her beside him. Roxanna hadn't planned on going anywhere except home, but the sincerity in his voice pushed past every hesitation. She nodded before she could talk herself out of it. They didn't stay at the restaurant. He asked if she minded walking, and she said yes, Actually, she'd love that. So they set out on foot through River North, boots crunching over untouched patches of snow. The world glowed under streetlights, the cold air giving every breath a soft cloud. Grondin kept a respectful distance, close enough that she felt protected but not claimed. Their conversation came easily, so much easier than either expected. She teased him about always ordering the same thing, and he admitted he ordered that dish only because she once said it was your favorite. She laughed, surprised, touched. They eventually wandered toward Little Italy, where he stopped in front of a small Italian restaurant with red brick walls and windows glowing gold. He confessed he hadn't been there in years. It belonged to a family friend from his childhood. His grandmother used to bring him here on Sundays after church, always ordering him the same plate of pasta because he'd refused to eat anything else. Inside, they sat at a corner table with a flickering candle and a window view of the steady snowfall. It was the first time she'd seen him in a place that meant something personal, not a lounge, not a meeting space, not neutral territory. He was different here, less guarded, almost boyish when he talked about his grandmother. He described her as the only person who ever loved him without conditions, the only one who never asked for anything in return. His voice softened when he said he still missed her every day. Roxanna listened with full attention, her heart warming at the image of a small boy clinging to the only tenderness he had growing up. She shared her own truths, how leaving school still felt like a bruise she carried, how she tried not to feel regret but sometimes couldn't help it, how she wished life had given her more time, more chances, more stability. Her voice wavered when she mentioned her grandmother's health scares, the long nights spent worrying, the weight she carried alone because she refused to burden others. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer fixes. He didn't treat her problems like puzzles he needed to solve. He simply listened, something so simple, yet something she rarely received. By dessert, something in the air had shifted. No declarations, no dramatic leaps, just two souls unfolding without pressure, two people letting each other look at the parts usually hidden. On the walk back, the snow intensified, coating their coats, their hair, the world around them until the street looked transformed. When they reached her apartment building in Bronzeville, she hesitated at the gate, half expecting him to pull back into his usual guarded self. Instead, he stepped closer, not invading her space, just near enough that she felt the heat of him despite the cold. His voice was low, sincere. "I want to see you again. Like this." She didn't need time to think. Her yes came softly but with certainty. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't blind. It was a choice that startled them both with its clarity. She stood at her door, heart pounding in ways she hadn't felt in years. Grondin watched her with an expression she had never seen on him before, a mixture of gratitude, hope, and something so achingly gentle it made her chest tighten. He didn't ask to come inside. He didn't push for more. He simply reached out, brushed a snowflake from her hair, and whispered goodnight. As he turned to leave, she realized the cold didn't bother her anymore. He walked away slowly, as if memorizing the sound of her, the sight of her, the feeling of being wanted for reasons that had nothing to do with power or control. That night changed something fundamental between them. Not because of a kiss or a promise or anything grand, but because they had seen each other, really seen, and neither wanted to go back to the distance they'd lived in before. The weeks that followed moved with a rhythm neither of them expected. What started as one snowy evening became a quiet pattern of shared moments, each one gently shifting the world they knew. Sometimes they met after Roxanna's shifts, when the city was settling into night. Other times, Grondin picked her up on his way to nowhere in particular. He loved driving a long lakeshore drive with her beside him, the city's lights reflecting off the frozen lake like scattered silver. She always rolled the window down a little, just enough to feel the wind on her face. He pretended it didn't make the car colder, simply because he liked watching how alive she looked in the night air. They explored parts of Chicago he hadn't visited in years, places that held childhood memories he rarely shared, places she'd only seen from bus windows. He drove her to Wilmette one Sunday morning, where they walked quietly around the Baha'i temple, snow crunching beneath their boots. Roxanna felt the peace of the place in her chest, and he watched her as though the entire trip had been worth it just to see the soft light in her eyes. On other days, they wandered Bronzeville hand in hand, slipping into soul food restaurants she'd grown up loving. Grondin always let her order for him, always tried everything she insisted on, even when he didn't fully understand what he was tasting. She laughed when he coughed at the spice, and he laughed with her, surprised at how natural it felt to sound that free. And as winter deepened, so did they. Grondin's people noticed first. He wasn't the same. He checked his phone during meetings, not because he was bored, but because Roxanna sent him a funny message about a rude customer or a photo of the snow piling up outside the restaurant. When his second-in-command mentioned a late-night appointment, Grondin turned it down without apology, saying he had other plans. Plans that involved takeout containers, her favorite blanket, and the two of them sitting on her couch watching whatever show she claimed he absolutely had to try. His associates exchanged looks. This wasn't the man they were used to, a man who never deviated from routine, who never allowed emotion to sway him. They whispered concerns among themselves, but none dared speak directly to him. They saw the shift and worried about what it might mean for their world, one built on control, fear, and calculations. To them, softness wasn't romance. It was dangerous, but Grondin didn't care. He found himself smiling more, genuine smiles, not the polite ones he used during meetings or the cold smirks he gave people who annoyed him. Real smiles that reached his eyes. Sometimes he caught himself doing it alone in his car and shook his head because he couldn't believe how deeply this woman had slipped into the spaces he'd locked up long ago. Roxanna felt the transformation too, though hers wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about stepping into a life where she felt valued, not for what she could do, but for who she was. Grondin never tried to take over her choices. When she talked about maybe going back to school someday, he didn't offer to pay for everything or push her into it. He simply asked what she wanted, truly wanted, and then listened as she sorted through her hopes aloud. He encouraged without hovering, supported without directing. The first time he helped with her grandmother's medical bills, it wasn't a grand gesture or some dramatic reveal. He overheard Roxanna stressing on the phone, quietly placed an envelope on her kitchen counter, and told her she didn't owe him anything, not even gratitude. The moment mattered not because of the money, but because of the respect that came with it. He didn't try to claim authority over her life. He didn't expect her to repay him in devotion. He simply cared. Their intimacy grew in ways both tender and slow-burning. There were nights they stayed tangled in each other's warmth, learning every curve of each other's bodies with patience instead of urgency. But there were also quieter moments, him brushing her hair away from her face as she fell asleep, her tracing the faint scar on his wrist, asking about it without judgment. He didn't tell the full story, not yet, but he told her enough to let her know it mattered. They created small rituals without even noticing. She brewed him tea the same way every time, 2 spoons of honey, a slice of lemon. He left a fresh bundle of flowers on her table once a week, always arranged differently, as though trying to learn her tastes through trial and error. They shared the kind of closeness that didn't need declarations. Each day they learned something new, what made the other laugh, what made them go quiet, what eased their fears, what sparked their confidence. But outside their bubble, voices grew louder. Grondin's people worried. Some told him outright that his attention was slipping, that enemies watched for weakness, that he needed to keep his distance. He shut down the conversations as soon as they began, but the warnings lingered like shadows at the edge of his mind. Roxanna faced questions too. Her friends pulled her aside after shifts, gently asking whether she really knew who she was falling for, whether she understood his world, his reputation, the things whispered about him on the streets and in back rooms. She insisted she did, but even she couldn't deny that the edges of his life were darker than anything she had ever encountered. Still, love has a way of making people brave. She chose him with her eyes open, not because she thought she could fix him, but because she saw the man beneath the armor, a man who had never been given space to be gentle until her. And he chose her with the same certainty, even if choosing her meant stepping into vulnerability he had spent a lifetime avoiding. They didn't say "I love you" yet. They didn't need to. It was already there, in the way he touched her cheek with the back of his hand, in the way she smoothed his collar before he left her apartment, in the quiet moments that stitched their days together. Love was growing between them, steady and unforced, stronger with every shared breath. But love, no matter how deep, doesn't silence the worlds people come from. And both of their worlds were beginning to shift beneath their feet, preparing for the test that neither of them could see coming. February arrived with a kind of cold that cut straight through coats and gloves, the kind that made even the strongest people move slower. It was the type of weather that made the city feel smaller, tighter, as if everyone was pushed closer together just to survive the wind. It was also the month everything began to shift in ways neither Roxanna nor Grondin expected. At the Pearson house, the holiday rush had calmed, but winter crowds still filled tables. One Monday morning, a new server was introduced to the staff, Devon, a tall, cheerful guy from Atlanta with an easy smile and a voice that carried warmth even in the dead of winter. He'd come to Chicago chasing better pay and a fresh start, and he brought with him the kind of friendliness that immediately softened the room. To Roxanna, he was simply a new coworker. She trained him patiently, showing him the quirks of the restaurant, helping him navigate the confusing layout, and stepping in when he got overwhelmed by the lunch rush. Devon thanked her often, sometimes with a grin, sometimes with a light-hearted joke, and he asked her questions about the city she knew so well. She answered politely, a little shy but always gracious, exactly as she was with anyone. To anyone watching, their interactions looked normal, innocent, professional, but eyes were always watching, especially when it came to Grondin. Grondin's world ran on information, the movement of people, spoken words, loyalties, subtle shifts in behavior. He never asked for updates about Roxanna. He never instructed anyone to watch her. But his people, trying to protect him in the only ways they knew, relayed things to him anyway. Details they thought mattered. Observations they believed he deserved to hear. By mid-February, the report started. A male coworker talking to her often. A few shared laughs near the service station. A moment where he placed a hand on her elbow to guide her out of the path of a hurried bussier. A conversation that lasted longer than usual while they folded napkins. Nothing malicious, nothing inappropriate. But to the men who worked for Grondin, anything involving Roxanna felt like a threat to their boss's emotional state, and a threat to the stability of the world he ruled. So they told him. And even though Grondin nodded calmly, even though he said he trusted her, the words stuck in his mind like thorns. During meetings, he found himself drifting, thinking of her smile. He knew her, truly knew her loyalty, her steadiness, her heart. She wasn't flirtatious. She wasn't careless. She didn't collect attention like some people did. She was grounded, wise, honest in ways that still took his breath away. His rational mind clung to that truth. But there was another part of him, The part carved out by childhood betrayal, teenage survival, and adult violence. That part didn't understand calm reassurance. It only understood patterns. Loss, people leaving, trust being broken, affection turning into weapons against him. That part of him whispered in the dark. What if he's younger? What if he makes her laugh more easily? What if she realizes life could be simpler without you? It was irrational, and he knew it. But knowing didn't silence the thoughts. It only made him feel ashamed for having them. The tension grew inside him like pressure behind his ribs. He didn't mention it to Roxanna. He didn't want to seem insecure, and he didn't want to push her away. But silence was its own poison, and each day it ate at him a little more. By the time Friday arrived, he was restless. Meetings dragged. Conversations blurred. Every time his phone buzzed, he snatched it up, hoping for a message from her telling him she missed him, that she was thinking of him, that she was his. The message didn't come. At 7 that evening, one of his men casually mentioned that Roxanna was working a busy shift, and that she was paired with the new server again. That was all it took. The part of him that feared loss tightened around his chest, pushing out logic, replacing it with an ache he couldn't stomach. He grabbed his coat. He didn't call ahead. He didn't tell her he was coming. He simply drove through the icy streets, the city whipping past in a blow of headlights and snow. He felt foolish for letting anxiety guide him, but the thought of someone else standing too close to her, smiling at her, soaking up the warmth that had become his lifeline, it lit something raw inside him. When he reached the Pearson house, he walked inside without hesitation. The restaurant was in full Friday swing, voices led over the clinking of glasses, servers rushing past him, the host stammering as he recognized who had just stepped through the door. Grondin barely noticed any of it. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. Roxanna stood near the bar polishing glasses, her hair pulled into a neat bun, her cheeks flushed from the constant movement. Devon was beside her, helping with the task. He said something she found funny, something harmless, and Roxanna laughed softly, shoulders relaxing the way they did when she let herself breathe for a moment. That sound, her gentle laugh, cut straight through Grondin. Not because she wasn't allowed to laugh, not because she wasn't allowed to enjoy her job or connect with people, but because in that instant, jealousy slammed into him like a blow. Months of softening, of learning to love without clinging, of trying to be better, all of it trembled under the weight of old wounds snapping awake. His entire body tensed. A storm hit his expression. His jaw tightened. His fists curled. Devon looked up first. The smile faded from his face as he recognized who was staring at him. Roxanna didn't notice at first. She was too focused on finishing her task, but she felt the shift in the room. She always felt things like that. The stillness, the way people slowed down, the sudden silence that crept over the nearest tables. She turned and saw him, saw the look in his eyes, saw the jealousy he couldn't hide, saw the man she loved struggling against the shadows inside him. Her heart dropped, not in fear of him, but in fear of what this moment might do to everything they had been building. He stepped forward slowly, deliberate in every movement. His gaze stayed locked on Devon, not because he wanted to hurt him, but because jealousy had its claws in him now, pulling him off balance, clouding the gentleness Roxanna had spent months nurturing. It wasn't violence that filled him. It was desperation, possessiveness, the terrified belief that the world could take her from him at any second. And it was enough to awaken the monster he thought he'd buried, the version of himself shaped by survival, not by love. Grondin didn't look away from Devon as he crossed the restaurant floor. His steps were slow, controlled, but the tension rolling off him pulled every set of eyes toward their direction. The music continued playing softly overhead, but the conversations faded one by one until the quiet felt sharp enough to cut. Devon stood frozen. He wasn't foolish. He recognized power when it approached, and Grondin carried more of it than anyone else in the room. Roxanna saw it happening before she could reach them. She moved fast, but not fast enough to stop the moment Grondin positioned himself in front of Devon. "You should think about finding a different job," Grondin said, voice low but unmistakably firm. "Somewhere far from here." Devon swallowed. "Sir, I'm just—" "You're talking too much. To someone who isn't interested in you." Grondin's eyes narrowed. "I'm giving you advice. Take it." Every waiter, every bartender, every customer watching felt the shift. A threat delivered without shouting. A warning wrapped in calm words. It was the kind of moment people would remember long after they left the restaurant. What mattered most was Roxanna's reaction. She didn't yell. She didn't panic. She simply stepped beside Grondin, her face steady, her voice soft but firm. "Outside. Now." 3 small words. But they carried weight, because he listened. Grondin didn't argue. He didn't brush her off. He didn't make a scene. He let her guide him, which stunned the staff even more than his appearance. To see a man with his power turn and follow a woman out into the cold without hesitation said everything about how deeply she mattered to him. The instant they stepped into the night, snowflakes blew sideways across the sidewalk. The street light above them flickered weakly, and cars rolled past with muffled tires. Roxanna wrapped her coat tighter, not because of the cold, but because her chest felt tight with hurt she could no longer hold in. Grondin turned toward her, already recognizing the disappointment in her eyes. "Roxanna!" "Don't," she said softly. "Don't start with anything yet." He closed his mouth. For a moment, all she did was look at him. Not the boss, not the man feared across the city, but the man she had chosen. The man she trusted. The man she believed had goodness in him even when he struggled to show it. "You embarrassed me," she said, voice steady despite the heartbreak pressing against her ribs. "You embarrassed yourself. You scared someone who did nothing wrong. Do you understand how that looks?" His jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. "It makes me feel like I'm not a person to you," she continued, her voice shaking now. "Like I'm something you own. Something you need to guard instead of someone you need to trust." "That's not what I meant," he said quietly, his breath visible in the cold. "I just—" "You didn't trust me," she cut in gently. "Not for 1 second. You saw me laugh at someone's joke and jump straight to threats." He winced at the word. "Roxanna, I wasn't going to hurt him." Maybe not. But he didn't know that. Everyone inside didn't know that. They saw a powerful man cornering a new employee who has no idea who you are or what you're capable of. She paused. "That's wrong, Grondin. It's wrong in a way I can't ignore." Snow clung to her curls, her eyelashes, her coat, but she stood tall, voice calm, not hiding from the truth. "This is our first real fight," she said softly. "But it's not the jealousy that scares me. It's that you think fear is a reasonable answer to it." He took a shaky breath. The cold had nothing to do with the way his hands trembled. "I'm sorry," he said, the words sounding raw. "I shouldn't have spoken to him like that. I shouldn't have come here like this. I just—" He looked down, searching for steadiness. "I don't know how to love the right way." Her eyes softened, but she stayed firm. "Explain," she said. He met her gaze, helpless in a way he never allowed himself to be. "I've spent my whole life being told people would leave, that no one stays unless they are afraid of you, that love is something you hold tight enough to keep, even if it hurts everyone involved." His voice dropped. "I don't want to be that man with you. I don't. But when I heard you were close to someone else, I panicked. Not because I don't trust you, but because I'm terrified of losing you. Terrified you'll wake up one day and realize you deserve someone who doesn't come with the weight I carry." Roxanna's eyes glistened. Not from sadness, but from hearing the truth behind his anger. "Grondin," she said gently, "if loving me makes you feel like you have to control everything around me, we won't survive this." He swallowed hard. "I know." She stepped closer, reaching for his trembling hands. Her touch warmed him instantly, grounding him in a way nothing else ever had. "I need trust," she said. "Real trust. Not the kind that disappears the moment someone else talks to me. I need respect. For me, for the people around me, for the life I'm trying to build. I need to know that you won't turn every fear into a threat. I can't be in love with someone who uses intimidation as a solution." He closed his eyes, pained, ashamed. "But," she continued, "I can love someone who admits he needs help. Someone who tries. Someone who grows. If you're willing to learn a different way to love, one that doesn't choke the air out of us, I'll stand beside you through every step." His eyes opened. There was a shine to them she had never seen before, vulnerability, surrender, and something deeper, hope. "You want to stay?" he asked quietly. "With me?" "I want us," she corrected. "But us can't exist unless you change the way you react to fear. I won't accept anything less than sincerity, effort, and trust. But I won't leave you for not being perfect. Love isn't about perfection." He let out a breath he'd been holding for years. Maybe his entire life. "I'll learn," he whispered. "I don't know how yet, but I'll learn. I'll do whatever it takes." Roxanna squeezed his hands. That's all I needed to hear. In the cold, with snow drifting around them and the lights of River North glowing softly behind the windows, their future didn't feel impossible anymore. Hard, yes. Complicated, but not impossible. Not as long as they chose each other with open eyes and honest hearts. No one in Grondin's world had ever seen him hesitate, yet the morning he decided to seek help, he found himself staring at his reflection longer than usual. The man in the mirror looked powerful, composed, untouchable, but he knew better. He knew the damage he carried. He knew how close he'd come to losing Roxanna. And for once, instead of burying the fear, he chose to face it. He contacted a retired psychologist who had spent decades counseling people shaped by violence and survival. Their sessions took place in a discreet Lincoln Park apartment, guarded but quiet. The doctor spoke to him without flinching, without awe, without tiptoeing around the truth. It unsettled Grondin more than any armed threat ever had. Their early conversations were exhausting. He was used to controlling every environment he entered, yet here he had to let someone into the parts of himself he'd spent a lifetime locking away. The doctor asked questions he never expected to hear, questions about childhood memories he'd buried, losses he'd convinced himself no longer mattered, relationships he'd sabotaged before they could abandon him. Slowly, he began to understand what had fueled the jealousy that nearly cost him Roxanna. It wasn't about Devon. It wasn't about competition. It was the old belief carved into him long before adulthood, the belief that good things were temporary, that affection came with expiration dates, that control was the only barrier between him and heartbreak. Loving someone without gripping too tightly felt like inviting disaster. But he wanted to be better for her. Not because she demanded perfection, but because she deserved a man who could love without fear leading the way. Roxanna was doing her own work at the same time. She hadn't shared every detail of what happened with her grandmother, but she didn't hide the emotional fallout either. Her grandmother listened with patient eyes, gently insisting that loving a complicated man didn't make her weak. It made her responsible for her own boundaries, responsible for recognizing her limits, responsible for making choices rooted in clarity rather than fantasy. Together they discussed the difference between helping and losing oneself. Roxanna admitted she was drawn to the warmth beneath Grondin's hard exterior, the tenderness he showed in private, the unwavering loyalty he gave her. But she also admitted she needed to understand why she had given so much of her heart so fast. She wanted to love him fully, but not at the cost of her peace. Her grandmother's words stayed with her. You can love someone deeply, baby, but you must stay grounded. Don't forget who you are. So Roxanna held her boundaries. She didn't pull away, but she didn't allow excuses either. She told Grondin she supported his effort to grow, but he needed to take the lead in changing behaviors, not just apologizing for them. And to his credit, he met every standard. He didn't complain. He didn't negotiate. He listened. They spent evenings learning each other with new awareness. His intensity wasn't always anger. Sometimes it was fear he didn't know how to express. Her quiet pauses weren't withdrawal. Sometimes she needed time to think before she spoke. The more they talked, the more they realized how many misunderstandings in their past had grown simply because neither had slowed down enough to ask deeper questions. Their connection didn't just recover, it strengthened. They created small rituals to anchor themselves, a nightly walk when schedules allowed, Sunday breakfast before Roxanna's shifts, short texts during the day not to monitor each other but to stay linked in gentle, human ways. He started sharing thoughts he'd usually bury. She started voicing needs she once assumed would push him away. There were setbacks, moments where old habits tried to creep back in. A momentary flash of jealousy, a pause mistaken for rejection. But unlike before, they confronted each misstep with honesty rather than silence. He would say, "This is bringing up something old for me." She would respond, "This is what I need to feel safe again." And they would talk through it until neither felt alone inside their own mind. For Grondin, choosing vulnerability was harder than facing any enemy. Yet every time Roxanna looked at him with quiet faith, not blind trust, but grounded belief, he felt something shift inside. A sense that this love could survive as long as he kept showing up for it. For Roxanna, supporting him wasn't about saving him. It was about walking beside a man who was trying, really trying, to rewrite the rules he'd lived by. She didn't excuse his past, but she chose to believe in his effort to grow beyond it. By spring, their relationship didn't just resemble what it had been before the confrontation, it surpassed it. They weren't clinging to the early rush of affection anymore. They were choosing each other daily, fully aware that love was not a feeling that magically held two people together. Love was practice. Love was effort. Love was work. And both of them were finally willing to do it. Spring arrived in Chicago quietly, in the soft green shoots pushing through sidewalks and the tulips in Grant Park opening as if the city itself had taken a deep breath. Streets that had felt cold and rigid in winter now carried a sense of possibility. The air smelled of wet earth and optimism, and for Grondin and Roxanna, it felt like their lives were stretching into the same light. Grondin's world began to notice subtle but undeniable changes. Meetings that once ended in tension or veiled threats now concluded with careful discussions. Conflicts were handled without immediate escalation. He still commanded respect, but it came from his mind, his strategy, and increasingly from the example he set, not from fear alone. Some associates whispered about the differences, curious, uncertain, and in some cases, uneasy. The boss they had known to be unshakable was still formidable, yet capable of pause, of listening, of compromise. He had begun investing in legitimate business ventures, some cautious, some ambitious. More than money, it was the symbolic step of building an exit strategy from a world that had defined him for decades. Not a quest for redemption, exactly, but an evolution, a chance to live in a version of himself shaped not solely by survival, by control, or by violence, but by conscious choice. The process was careful, deliberate, and terrifying. Change at that scale was never simple. Yet he moved forward because Roxanna's presence reminded him daily what life could feel like without constant war. Roxanna, in turn, found herself embracing a new chapter. She returned to Columbia College Chicago for evening classes, carrying notebooks filled with thoughts that were once locked away. She wrote prolifically, her words exploring the complexity of human behavior and the tenderness that could exist alongside darkness. The writing was her therapy, her reflection, and her gift, a way to capture the evolution she was witnessing, both in herself and in the man she loved. Their lives intertwined in ways that made even ordinary days feel rich. Weekends were spent exploring parts of the city they had never seen together. Sunday mornings became a ritual of reading aloud to each other, exchanging passages and reflections. Her laughter followed him through hallways and offices. His attention followed her without smothering, always measured, always deliberate. Roxanna's grandmother moved with them into a larger apartment in Hyde Park, her health having stabilized. The apartment's windows framed Lake Michigan in the distance, sunlight reflecting off the waves like promise. She settled into her chair by the kitchen table, watching them arrange books, flowers, and kitchenware in ways that made the apartment feel like home. The grandmother offered both blessings and caution, her words carrying weight honed by experience. "You've done bad things," she said to Grondin quietly one afternoon as they carried groceries inside. "You're trying to do better. Don't stop trying. This woman," she gestured to Roxanna, "deserves your best. Not what you think is enough, but your best every day." Her eyes softened as they lingered on him. "She's chosen you for the man you're becoming, not the man you were. Honor that." Grondin nodded. There were no words powerful enough to respond fully. The grandmother's gaze reminded him of the responsibility he had chosen, not because anyone forced him, but because he wanted it. The life he was building, the love he was nurturing, required constant attention. There was no moment of pause where old habits could be ignored. There was no shortcut to living fully in this new way. Roxanna felt it too. She saw the tension lines of the past year soften around him, noticed the patience in his interactions with strangers, the restraint when an old associate tried to provoke a reaction. She knew the transformation wasn't complete, but it was ongoing. Their life together was proof that growth required persistence, courage, and consistent effort. Every compromise he made, every conscious decision to be better, strengthened their bond and reminded her why she had stayed through the difficult moments. Together, they walked through spring mornings and evenings, noticing the tulips, the sunlight on Lake Michigan, and the city slowly shedding winter's rigidity. Their love became part of the rhythm of the city itself, visible not in grand gestures, but in shared laughter over breakfast, in patience while studying, in quiet support during moments of stress, in the trust built over conversations that were no longer filtered by fear. And in these moments, both realized something important. Change was not a single event, a dramatic reveal, or a gift freely given. It was work. It was practice. It was dedication to the small, everyday choices that made a life worth building. The city around them, vibrant and reborn, reflected the shifts inside them, evidence that even the hardest, most entrenched parts of a person could soften, grow, and reach for something brighter when nurtured with love and patience. Late October arrived with the crisp, golden light of early sunset spilling over Lake Michigan. The city below was alive with shifting leaves and the muted hum of autumn traffic, but inside Grondin and Roxanna's Hyde Park apartment, The atmosphere carried a tension that had nothing to do with the season. Grondin had received intelligence that a rival organization was planning to strike, not directly at him, but at the people he loved, the ones he had spent the past year protecting in ways both subtle and profound. He sat at the edge of the apartment's balcony, dark eyes tracing the waves that reflected the dying light, and felt the old instinct stir, the one that always prioritized control, power, and elimination. He knew precisely what the first course of action would have been in the past: strike hard, make an example, assert dominance so thoroughly that no one dared challenge him again. It would guarantee safety, but only in the way his old life knew safety, through fear and dominance. Roxanna would be protected in the short term, but living in that shadow meant perpetual danger, emotional isolation, and the continuation of a cycle he had fought so hard to change. This time, there was another path, far more challenging, far more vulnerable. He could negotiate a truce. He could accept reduced influence and territory. He could allow the world to perceive weakness in exchange for the kind of stability that came with restraint rather than destruction. Choosing this path meant risking reputation, inviting criticism, and showing a side of himself that might appear soft, but it was the only choice that honored the life he and Roxanna had begun building together. Roxanna appeared quietly behind him, leaning on the balcony railing. She had sensed the tension in his messages, the subtle changes in his routine, and now she waited, patient but unwavering. He turned toward her, meeting her gaze, and for a long moment neither spoke. "I have to tell you everything," he said finally, his voice steady despite the weight pressing down on him. "I've learned something this year. I can no longer act out of fear and control if I want to keep you safe in the way you deserve. There's a threat coming, and my old response would be to strike first, strike hard, eliminate anyone who even hints at endangering you." Her hand rested lightly on his arm. "And the other choice?" she asked. Grondin exhaled, staring at the horizon. "The other choice requires giving up some power. It means negotiating, facing criticism, being perceived as weak. It means trusting that careful words, agreements, and restraint can protect you as much as my old methods ever did. It's harder because I have to be brave in a different way. I have to choose love over dominance, you over fear." Roxanna's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "Then you must choose. I can't make this choice for you. I love the man who is trying to be better, who makes mistakes but owns them, who fights for what's right in spite of fear. I do not love the boss the world fears. You have to decide who you want to be." Her words cut straight to the core of him. For a long minute, he felt the pull of instinct, the part of him that had survived everything by being relentless. Then he felt the presence of her steady hand, the faith she had in him, and the lessons he had lived for the past year. He realized that courage wasn't only measured in force. It was also measured in restraint, vulnerability, and integrity. "I will negotiate," he said finally, his voice low but resolute. "I will take the hits to my reputation. I will protect you without resorting to what I once thought was strength. I choose you, Roxanna, over fear, over control, over the part of me that would rather dominate than grow." Her hand moved to his face, thumb brushing along the line of his jaw. "That's the man I love," she said softly. "The one who's learning to build a life, not just survive it." Over the next few days, Grondin moved carefully but decisively. Meetings were held in neutral locations, messages relayed with precision, and a truce was negotiated. He ceded minor territories and influence but gained something far greater, a future in which Roxanna could exist safely, without fear hanging over her shoulders. His organization noticed the changes, some grudgingly, others with cautious hope. The man they had feared was still formidable, but his choices were guided by loyalty, love, and vision rather than intimidation. In the quiet of their apartment, overlooking the darkening lake, Grondin finally allowed himself to feel the weight of his decision. Choosing love had required more courage than any battle he had fought, and for the first time, he realized he could face the world without armor, without constant vigilance, because trust and partnership could be stronger than fear. Roxanna leaned against him, and together they watched the sunset reflect across the water, a reminder that choosing each other daily was the ultimate act of bravery. November had settled into the city, cold but calm, and the Pearson house glowed with the soft warmth of evening lights. Roxanna arrived, not in her work uniform, but in a dress that made her feel both elegant and at ease. Grondin waited in a quiet corner of the restaurant, his posture relaxed but attentive. He wasn't here as a customer. He wasn't here as the feared boss of Chicago's underground. He was here as a man choosing to be present, as a man wanting to honor the life he had been building with her. Their table was set simply, candles flickering softly. The service moved around them, unnoticed. Grondin reached across and took her hand. It was a small gesture, one that carried all the weight of his attention and intention. "I have something for you," he said quietly. He opened his palm to reveal a small, elegant ring, his grandmother's ring. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to impress anyone but her. It was a piece of love passed down, untouched by power, untouched by fear, the only inheritance in his life rooted in genuine connection rather than control. Roxanna looked at it, then at him. Her eyes searched for hesitation and found none. His choice was simple, certain, and yet monumental. He offered this ring not as a display, but as a promise that he wanted a life built together, grounded in trust, effort, and love. "Yes," she said. Not softly, not in hesitation, but clearly, wholeheartedly. Her answer wasn't about need, or fear, or relief. It was a choice made with understanding, with knowledge of who he had been and who he was becoming. She wanted this life, with this man, in this imperfect but real way. The months that followed led to a small spring wedding at the Baha'i temple. Cherry blossoms were in bloom, delicate and bright, contrasting the intensity of the past years. Her grandmother's tears ran freely, joyful and proud. Friends whispered about the union, curious about how the feared Grondin could be the same man standing before them, calm and committed. His associates, used to the sight of him wielding influence with certainty and intimidation, shifted uncomfortably. Yet all of it mattered less than the two of them exchanging vows. Their ceremony was simple, intentional. Every glance, every word, carried the weight of a journey marked by challenges, by growth, and by daily choices to trust and to stay. There was laughter, quiet smiles, and hands held firmly, not out of obligation, but because each had earned the presence of the other through effort, honesty, and understanding. Life after that day continued to test and refine them. They discovered that vulnerability was strength, not weakness. They learned that people were more than the sum of their worst actions. Love required boundaries as much as it required openness. Growth was ongoing, never complete, and sometimes slower than they wished, but always forward. They were not perfect. Mistakes happened. Frustrations rose. Old instincts tested their patience. Yet they chose each other daily. That was the commitment that mattered most, the choice to see, to respect, and to support the person you love, even when life made that difficult. Evenings in their Hyde Park apartment became their sanctuary. Roxanna wrote from her desk, immersed in stories shaped by the complexity she had learned to understand in others. Grondin sat behind her, arms wrapped around her shoulders, one hand brushing the top of her curls. Tattoos traced his skin, reminders of survival and struggle, but in their gentle embrace, those marks became part of a narrative they were rewriting together. Through the wide windows, Lake Michigan reflected twilight, waves moving steadily, unhurried. Grondin's voice would sometimes hum softly, a simple observation or comment on her writing, or they would share the silence together, knowing it spoke as clearly as words ever could. Home, they realized, was not a place. It was a person. Someone who saw you completely, who stayed, who chose you over fear and old habits and the easy way out. As they leaned into that quiet certainty, their pasts did not vanish, nor did the challenges that shaped them. Instead, the shadows of who they had been provided depth to who they were becoming. Each day was a continuation of choosing to be better, for themselves and for each other. And in that apartment, overlooking the dark lake under the glow of city lights, they found the life they had both longed for, a life built on trust, effort, and love that demanded work but offered immeasurable reward. They were together. They were growing. They were home. My dad had always believed in me hitting 10,000 subscribers, even on his sickbed. I don't want to give up on his hope now. If you'd like to support my journey, please hit that subscribe button. Your subscription would mean more than you know.